One of the things that I've really enjoyed doing in class over the last couple of years has been an exercise I call, Who Are You Listening To? Now, in this exercise, I have a couple of blindfolds, a couple of water pistols. I put one student on one side of the class and one student on the other side of the class, blindfolded with a water pistol in hand. And I say, find the other one and spray them. And what I tell the rest of the class, who are all still sitting in their desks, is you need to help them get there. And what it ultimately always turns into is a whole lot of shouting. And those students who experience being blindfolded say, I had no idea who I was supposed to listen to. I didn't know who to trust. And I actually make it more complicated because I'm usually misdirecting them, telling them to turn the wrong way or to duck randomly because it makes everybody laugh. But the underlying lesson in this exercise is the fact that we spend our lives hearing a lot of voices and we don't know who we're supposed to listen to. Well, in John chapter 10, the gospel that's going to be read at Mass the weekend of May 2nd and 3rd this year, we hear Jesus say, the sheep know the Good Shepherd's voice. They know and they trust the Good Shepherd's voice because they've heard it their whole lives, leading them to green pastures, leading them into safety. And the underlying question for us is, do we know God's voice? And who are we listening to? One of the simple ways we can work on that experience, we can build up that quality in ourselves of knowing God's voice, is to spend time reading His Word. Learning His voice for ourselves. So we're going to dive into John's Gospel together here. Now, a few of you might wonder, why John's Gospel? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that I literally just did Matthew's Gospel with a group of students at St. Peter's over the winter. But the other one is that it's one of my favorites. It's a very poetic gospel, and it's a gospel that's written to be accessible to anybody. If you're somebody who has been very active in their faith, who spent a lot of time studying the words of Jesus, there's still more to discover here. And if you're somebody who's just stumbled upon this by accident and you're just getting started, there's something to discover here. This gospel has been written for you. A couple of notes for you about John and about John's gospel. The gospel, we believe, was written sometime in the late 1st century by John, who is known in this particular gospel as the beloved disciple, never refers to himself by name. We know that John and his brother James were both called to be amongst Jesus' 12, the apostles who were sent. They're the sons of a man named Zebedee, but they're also sometimes referred to as the sons of thunder, which sounds like a really awesome metal band name. But perhaps more importantly, one of the things we learn about John, he's younger, but he was initially a disciple of John the Baptist. Now, if that's the case, this means that John, like a lot of us, is looking for something. He's searching for some deeper meaning in his life. That's why he follows the Baptist, and that's why when the Baptist tells him to, he goes and he follows Jesus. Now, one of the things you'll notice about this particular gospel is that every person who encounters Jesus, their response is either to move towards Jesus or to move away from him. John writes this gospel, I think, with that idea in mind. And the entire purpose of the gospel, he actually spells it out for us. In John 20, verse 31, he says, "These things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." That's where I've taken the title for this study, Life in His Name. It's my hope that this study will do the same thing for you. That you, in studying these things, will come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that you too might have life in his name. Now, the gospel itself can be divided into two major parts. Chapter 1 to 12 is referred to as the book of signs, and chapters 13 through 20 is referred to as the book of glory. And the distinction between the two is something Jesus talks about in the gospel called his hour. You'll hear very early on of a miracle at the wedding at Cana. And Mary comes to Jesus and asks Jesus to help, and he says, "My hour has not yet come." Well, what hour are we talking about? Well, it's the hour of his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. You'll hear a marked difference, beginning with the Last Supper, when Jesus washes his apostles' feet, leading through all the events of his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and the giving of the Holy Spirit. Now, the book of signs are specific signs, specific miracles and healings that Jesus performs, all of which testify to his identity as the Son of God. The book of glory tells us a little bit about how much he loves us and what he's doing for us. And it contains some of the most beautiful discourses or sermons to be found anywhere in the New Testament. his sermon of the vine and the branches, his prayer at the Last Supper. Beautiful, profound things. We're going to take these apart in bite-sized pieces. And it's my hope that as you hear them, as you study them, as you pray with them, that you would be one of those who responds by moving towards him. That you too might come to have life in his name.